Pray with me, please. Holy and loving God, for the way that you call each and every one of us into relationship with you, we thank you and we praise you. We thank you that you've drawn us together tonight. We thank you for the witness to this faith in which we lean and find ourselves this night. We ask that you come and that you open our hearts and our minds so that it may be your spirit that stirs within us, that touches us and that draws us closer to you. And we ask this, Jesus, in your name. Amen. Amen. So this evening I kind of wanted to get back to basics a little bit. And I know that I know that it's an old question, but I think it's worth revisiting. And that is, what does it mean to be a Christian? Ta-da! So, and I know that there are lots and lots of answers. I think that perhaps we could start with, to be a Christian means to be a follower of Jesus. But after we've kind of all agreed that, what that means changes radically depending on where you are, from denomination to denomination. So this evening I want to talk about my idea of what it is to be a Christian and share that with you because it's foundational to my faith, and I hope that you find connections in that that will help you on your journey. So first of all, I think that Jesus taught us what was important when he gave us the commandment, if you love me, you will follow my commandments. And he gave two commandments that are based on the Old Testament. And if you got a Bible with you, it's Matthew 22, 36 to 40. I just want to, and I know you know this anyway, but we're just going to have a quick look. So it's Matthew 22, 36 to 40. Teacher, Jesus was asked, which commandment in the law is the greatest? And he said to them, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. And the second is like it, you shall love your neighbour as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. I always find it interesting how we always tend to focus on the second of those commandments. And I think it's probably easier for us to do so because that's the one that Jesus talks the most about. In John 13:34, he says, I give you a new commandment, that you love one another, just as I have loved you, you should also love one another. By this everyone will know that you're my disciples, if you have love one for another. So, loving each other, being God's love in the world, following Christ and being Christ's example in the world and reaching out in Christ's name in the world, these are the things that we see as identifiers to being Christian. And those things are not easy, but they're a lot easier than the first commandment, which we kind of tend to brush over. We kind of think, well, you know what, the second commandment will focus on that, because that we can do something about. That we know. Whereas the first one, that feels a bit more woolly, so, you know, we'll kind of disregard that. But what does it mean to love God with all your heart, soul, and mind? What does it mean to love anyone that way? Now, when it's your partner, it means that you share intimacies that you don't share with anyone else. Now, the difference from person to person and relationship to relationship, but generally, if you love someone with all your heart, soul, and mind, then you share your resources with them. What is mine is Chris's, what is Chris's is mine. We share everything between us. You share your hopes and dreams. So we support each other in our goals and in our aims. These are the things that are important to us in life, and we support each other on those journeys. I sleep with him, which means that he gets to see me when I'm vulnerable, when I'm snoring, when I'm drooling. You know, those moments in the middle of the night when I blame the dog. You have intimate moments, experiences that you don't share with anybody else. They're just between the two of you. And it's the same with God. Now, of course, the problem with saying that is that all the moments that Jesus or anyone else shared with God that were intensely intimate, in general, are not recorded because they're intimate moments. Now, we know that Jesus went off to spend time with God and to pray, just as Adam and Eve walked with God in the Garden of Eden in the afternoons. But for the most part, we don't know what they talked about because it's private, because it was intimate. But occasionally in the Bible, we have moments when intimate moments can be witnessed. For example, the kiss that a couple share, a tearful farewell, a joy-filled welcome. These are all very intimate moments that we do see in public. So I'd like to share one with you and show you my take on it. We're going to 2 Samuel chapter 6, and we're looking at King David, and we're looking at verses 16 and 20 to 22. So that's 2 Samuel 6, 16 and 20 through 22. So I don't know if you know the backstory, but King David has been trying to get the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem, and there's been all kinds of problems. But eventually, the road kind of clears, and they realize that this is the time, and the Ark of the Covenant comes into Jerusalem. It says, the Ark of the Lord came into the city of David, and Michal, daughter of Saul, looked out of the window, one of David's wives, and saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, and she despised him in her heart. Verse 20. David returned to bless his household, but Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David and said, "Oh, how the king of Israel honoured himself today, uncovering himself today before the eyes of his servants' maids, as any vulgar fellow might shamelessly uncover himself." David had gone out in his underwear. He saw the Ark of the Covenant coming in, he got all excited, he ran out in his underwear, and he just danced in front of it. Michal is not too pleased. And David says to Michal, "It was before the Lord who chose me in place of your father, who chose me in place of his household, the people of the Lord, that I have danced before the Lord. I will make myself yet more contemptible than this, and I will be abased in my own eyes. But by the maids of whom you've spoken, by them I shall be held in honour." So why is it that Michal, his wife, one of his wives, despised him because of what he did, and yet the servants of the maids were honoured by it and actually thought more of David because of it? Because David allows a very intimate moment with God to become public. And Micah sees him and she believes that he's debasing himself. Whereas the women look at David and they see a man so in love with God that he really just doesn't care if he makes a fool of himself. It's love, and they know love, and they know intimacy, and they value it. He rises in their esteem because he is someone who allows love to take control of him. And who doesn't want a lover who's willing to look like a fool to show you how much they adore you? Which is exactly what David does. Come to the book of John, chapter 13. I'm going to look at verses 1 to 5. John chapter 13, verses 1 to 5. Because we do have an example of Jesus being intimate. It says, before the festival of Passover, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from this world and to go to the parent. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The devil had already put it in the heart of Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, to betray him. And during supper, Jesus, knowing that God had given all things into his hand, and that he'd come from God and was going to God, got up from the table, took off his outer robe, and tied a towel around himself. So he takes off his outside robe, down to his skivvies, puts a towel around himself, he pours water into a basin, and he begins to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that's tied around him. You know, when a podiatrist does that, washes your feet, it's fine because it's a service that you're paying for. When a servant does it, then that's fine because, again, it's a service that you're paying for. But when somebody you love does it, when somebody you care about does it, suddenly that becomes the most intimate of experiences. Jesus knows what's about to happen, and he reaches out to the disciples in the most intimate way possible. It's one thing to have that service provided by some kind of care professional. It's another when the Son of God does it. And Jesus says that the disciples must imitate him, share themselves in a way that they wouldn't think to do except with someone that they were in a deep relationship with. And Jesus is showing us God. Jesus is showing us that God wants to be in an intimate relationship with us. And we know this. I mean, Jesus talks, for example, about the marriage feast all the time, about being the bridegroom, and the church, that's you and I, being the bride. And it's not about gender, it's about intimacy. It's about that intimate relationship. Because if you love God with all your heart, soul and mind, then you're intimate with God. And you allow God to be intimate with you. And that relationship is private. It's between the two of you. It's not about me, it's not about the church, it's not about some teaching, it's certainly not about religion. It's about you and God in the most intimate ways. And like any intensely personal relationship, you don't share those things with anyone else, because if you do, you risk losing them. You tell others about the most intimate parts of your relationship, and I'm not talking about a counselor or a priest, where the conversation is private and you're talking confidentially. I'm talking about using intimacies to boost your own ego. You never guess what my partner does for me. You never guess what this person does for me. Try that and see how long those intimacies remain intimacies. Last year, comedian Louise Ray was sued for £30,000 by her ex-husband because she used material about their marriage in a show at the Edinburgh Fringe. Now they'd already separated, but he sued under defamation and breach of privacy. Because some things are just private. Some things are personal. Intimate things don't get shared. And you really want to learn from my example, because it took me a while to work this out. And a few years ago, I can remember, I went through a period of driving around, and I was making some long journeys at the time. And what I found was that on the journey, I would start to sing. And the singing would go places that I never expected. And some of the melodies and the words were just exquisite. And I realized after a while that it was just God and I singing together, that it was the Spirit that was moving. Sometimes it was in English, sometimes it wasn't. And the melodies were just gorgeous. And I thought, you know what? It'd be nice to share this. I'll get a tape recorder out, and the next time it happens, I'll record it. And guess what? It never happened again. I went through a really quite dark time, and Jesus would come and get in the car and drive with me. Literally, just sit in the passenger seat, and we drive along together, and we talk together. And then one day, there was a series out, a TV series called The Book of Daniel. And I happened to be watching it with some folks from the church. And in the series, the minister is just driving along, and suddenly Jesus is just sat there with him. And I went, that's what happens with me. That's what Jesus does with me. And guess what? He never did it again. He never came and sat in the car and just journeyed with me again. God is as jealous as any lover. Your relationship with God is private and intimate and not for sharing unless you want to check first with God. Or check with me that it is God and that you haven't gone loopy. Now, so far as I know, I've never met anybody who actually was loopy, leastways not because they were in a relationship with God. And take my advice. If you feel like sharing something personal with the third party, again, check with God first. The same way that comedians should check with their partners, or even ex-partners, before making intimate comments at the sketch show in the Edinburgh Fringe. In Exodus 34:14, it says that one of God's names is jealous. It says God is called jealous, and God is jealous. God is jealous of the relationship that you have. Just as I'm jealous of the relationship that Chris and I have, nobody else gets to enter that relationship. It's our relationship, it's personal, it's private, it's intimate. Nobody else gets to enter that relationship at the level that we enjoy it. The same with the relationship with God. God is jealous of the relationship that God has with you. Nobody else gets to enter that. And it's a huge risk if you invite other people into that relationship. Having a relationship with God, of course, doesn't mean that you don't have a relationship with anybody else, but it does mean that the relationship that you have with God is personal and private. So, now you might be thinking, how do you develop a personal relationship with God, one that's as intimate as the one that Jesus had? Well, actually, that's really easy because Jesus tells us. If you look at Matthew chapter 6, and it's really odd because this set of scriptures suddenly makes complete sense when you start thinking of it that way. Jesus says, before practicing your piety before others in order to be seen by them, for then you have no reward from God in heaven. So whenever you give alms, do not sound a trumpet before you, as the hypocrites in the synagogues do, so that they may be praised by others. Truly I tell you, they've received their reward. But when you give alms, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your alms may be done in secret, and God, who is in secret, will reward you. What? With money? With fame? With more than you gave? No, with intimacy, because it's between the two of you, and it's private and personal. And whenever you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand in the synagogues and at the street corners, so they may be seen by others. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward. But whenever you pray, go into your room, shut the door, and pray to your parent who is in secret. And your parent who is in secret will reward you. What with? A longer life? Better friends? A nicer house? No, a relationship. Intimacy. Whenever you fast, do not look dismal like the hypocrites, for they disfigure their faces so as to show others they are fasting. Truly I tell you, they've received their reward. But when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face, so that your fasting may not be seen by others, but by your parent who is in secret, and God, who sees in secret, will reward you. What is fasting about? Fasting has been done for countless generations by folk who want to connect more deeply with God. And what is the gift that gives? What is the reward that's given for fasting? Is it more wealth? Is it a better place in heaven? Is it forgiveness of sins? No, it's intimacy. It's that intimate relationship with God. That's what Jesus is talking about. He talks about concerning treasures. Do not store up for yourself treasures on earth where moth and rust consume and where thieves break in and steal, but store for yourselves treasure in heaven where neither moth nor rust consumes and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. If your heart is in God, if that's where it is, if there is an intimate relationship with God, then nothing can get in the way of that. Not even death. Nothing else gets in the way. It is the securest and most amazing foundation for a life that you could possibly want. And it will go with you everywhere. That's what Jesus is talking about. So the first thing that Jesus says that we must do, I believe, as Christians in order to follow Jesus, is to love God with all our heart, all our soul, and all our mind. And that means becoming intimate and allowing God to be intimate with us.